The laughter reached Lysanne before the carriage did. She stood frozen at the window of Draymont Manor's morning room, her embroidery abandoned on the settee behind her, watching the gleaming black coach roll up the gravel drive. The crest on its door caught the afternoon sunlight, not her husband's crest, but one she didn't recognize. Gold serpents intertwined around a thorned rose. Behind her, the servants had gone silent. That particular silence that meant they knew something she didn't. "Who is it?" Lysanne asked, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. She was 18 now, a full year into her marriage, but she still sounded like the frightened girl who'd been handed to Gavrick Draymont at 17, like a debt payment, because that's exactly what she'd been. No one answered. The carriage door opened, and a woman emerged. She was everything Lysanne was not. Tall, where Lysanne was small. Voluptuous, where Lysanne was slight. Draped in crimson silk that clung to every curve, while Lysanne wore the same gray morning dress she'd worn for 3 seasons, because Gavrick said new clothes were a waste on someone who never left the house. But it wasn't the woman's beauty that made Lysanne's blood turn to ice. It was the way Gavrick descended the front steps to greet her, the way he took her gloved hand and pressed it to his lips, the way he smiled, actually smiled, when he hadn't smiled at Lysanne once in their entire marriage. "Ah," the voice came from behind her. Mrs. Heswick, the housekeeper, her tone carefully neutral. That would be Lady Valindra Corsair, Lord Draymont's guest. Guest. The word hung in the air like poison. Lysanne watched as Gavrick tucked the woman's hand into the crook of his arm and led her toward the house, toward the front entrance, the entrance reserved for family and honored visitors. "How long?" Lysanne heard herself ask. "I beg your pardon, my lady. How long has she been his mistress?" The silence stretched. Mrs. Heswick cleared her throat. "I'm sure I don't know what you—" "Don't." Lysanne turned from the window, and something in her face must have shown, because the housekeeper flinched. "Don't lie to me. Everyone else in this house lies to me. I'm asking you for the truth." Mrs. Heswick's weathered face softened with something that might have been pity. "Since before your wedding, my lady. She was. She was supposed to be the one he married, but her family's fortune collapsed, and your father's offer was more advantageous. Since before her wedding. Lysanne had been a replacement, a transaction, a warm body with a dowry attached, purchased because the woman he actually wanted had become too expensive." The front door opened downstairs. She heard Gavrick's voice, warm and solicitous, and Valindra's answering laugh, low, intimate, proprietary. "Where is my wife?" Gavrick called out. "Lysanne, come greet our guest." Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to lock herself in her chambers and pretend this wasn't happening. But she'd spent a year hiding, a year making herself small and quiet and invisible, hoping that if she was good enough, obedient enough, Gavrick might eventually treat her with something other than cold indifference. That hope died in this moment. She descended the staircase with spine straight and chin lifted, the way her mother had taught her before the consumption took her. "Grace under fire," her mother used to say. "They can take everything from you, but they cannot take your dignity unless you surrender it." Gavrick stood in the entrance hall with Valindra on his arm. He looked up at Lysanne with those flat gray eyes that had never held any warmth, and his lips curved into something cruel. "There she is, my little wife." He said it the way one might say, "My little inconvenience." "Valindra, darling, this is Lysanne. Lysanne, this is Lady Valindra Corsair. She'll be staying with us, indefinitely." Indefinitely. Valindra's smile was a weapon, sharp and glittering. "How delightful to finally meet you. Gavrick has told me so much about you." Her eyes swept over Lysanne's gray dress, her simply pinned hair, her lack of jewels. "Though I must say, he undersold your quaintness." "Lady Valindra, Lysanne forced the words past the glass in her throat. "Welcome to Draymont Manor." "Oh, I've been here many times before." Valindra's laugh was like breaking crystal, though never through the front door. How novel. The implication landed like a slap. Lysanne felt her cheeks burn, but she refused to look away. "I've had the blue suite prepared for Lady Valindra," Gavric continued, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. "The one adjoining mine." The blue suite. The suite that connected to the master chambers through a private door. The suite that had been Lysanne's mother-in-law's before she died. "Of course," Lysanne whispered. What else could she say? "Marvelous." Gavric was already turning away, already dismissing her. "We'll dine at 8. Wear something decent for once. I won't have you embarrassing me in front of Valindra." They swept past her up the stairs, Valindra's crimson skirts brushing against Lysanne's gray ones, the scent of expensive French perfume lingering like a taunt. Lysanne stood alone in the entrance hall, surrounded by servants who wouldn't meet her eyes. She was still standing there, still struggling to breathe, when the second carriage arrived. This one bore a different crest, a silver falcon against a midnight sky. The coachman wore midnight livery trimmed in silver, and the horses were the most magnificent creatures Lysanne had ever seen, coal-black with manes that gleamed like silk. A footman opened the carriage door. The man who emerged was not what she expected. He was younger than Gavric, perhaps 28 or 29, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of a winter storm. He moved with the unconscious authority of someone who had never been questioned in his life, and when his gaze swept across the manor's facade, it held the assessment of a man who found everything wanting. Then his eyes found her. Lysanne stood frozen in the doorway, small, gray, insignificant, and the Duke of Stormhaven looked at her like he was seeing something no one else had ever bothered to notice. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but something in his expression shifted, and Lysanne felt a shiver run down her spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. "Well," said a voice from the top of the stairs. Gavric had returned, his arm still wrapped around Valindra. "Renville. What an unexpected pleasure." The Duke's gaze didn't move from Lysanne's face. "Gavric," he said, his voice low and precise. "I think you have something that belongs to me." The entrance hall of Draymont Manor had never felt smaller. Lysanne watched the two men face each other across the marble floor, her husband rigid with barely concealed hostility, the Duke radiating a calm that felt somehow more dangerous than any display of anger. "I beg your pardon?" Gavric's voice carried the sharp edge of offense. "I'm not certain I understand your meaning." "Then allow me to clarify." The Duke, Renville, Gavric had called him, finally broke his gaze from Lysanne's face, though she could still feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch. "The Merryweather shipping contracts, the ones you acquired 6 months ago through your marriage." Marriage. The word hung in the air, and Lysanne understood suddenly what she was. Not a wife, not even a person. A vehicle through which business arrangements were made. "Those contracts are none of your concern," Gavric said coldly. "They became my concern when your father-in-law defaulted on his debts to my estate." Renville's tone was almost conversational, but his eyes were steel. "Debts he incurred before his death, which were never properly disclosed during your marriage negotiations. Debts which, by law, transferred to you upon your union with his daughter." Lysanne's heart stopped. Her father had been in debt to a duke. Her father had sold her to Gavric to escape that debt. And now, those debts were settled, Gavric snapped. "The dowry?" "The dowry your wife brought covered perhaps a third of what was owed." Renville reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, the seal unbroken. "The rest remains outstanding. I've been patient, Draymont, perhaps too patient, but my patience has expired." Valindra descended the stairs with calculated grace, positioning herself at Gavrick's side like a queen claiming her throne. "Surely this is a matter for solicitors and private offices, Your Grace, not for entrance halls." Renville's gaze flickered to her, and something cold passed through his expression. "Lady Valindra, I didn't realize you'd taken up residence here. How unconventional." The barb landed precisely where intended. Valindra's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "The Duke of Stormhaven," she said sweetly. "I've heard you've been rejecting marriage proposals for years. How fortunate that you can afford to be selective." "Fortune has nothing to do with it." His attention returned to Gavrick. "The debt, Draymont. I want it settled. Today." Gavrick's face had gone pale beneath his tan. "I don't have that kind of capital readily available. The estates are profitable, but then we have a problem." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lysanne watched her husband's expression cycle through fury, calculation, and something that looked almost like fear. She had never seen Gavrick afraid of anything. "There must be an arrangement we can reach," Gavrick said finally, his voice strained. "Some alternative payment." Renville's smile was razor thin. "I'm listening." Gavrick's gaze slid to Lysanne, and her stomach dropped. She knew that look, the same look he'd given her on their wedding night before, informing her that he had no intention of consummating their union because he couldn't bear to touch something so disappointing. "My wife," Gavrick said slowly, "is young, reasonably educated, from a respectable family, despite her father's failures. She could serve as—" "Gavrick." Valindra's voice carried a warning. "As what?" Renville's tone had gone dangerously soft. "A companion. For your household. Your sister requires—" "You're offering me your wife as a servant?" The words cracked through the entrance hall like a whip. Lysanne felt her face flame with humiliation, but she couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stand there while her husband bartered her like livestock. "Not a servant," Gavrick corrected hastily. "A companion. A lady's companion. It's perfectly respectable. She'd be housed, fed, cared for, and the debt would be—" "You disgust me." Renville's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. He moved then, crossing the entrance hall in 3 long strides, until he stood directly in front of Lysanne. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, could smell sandalwood and something darker, could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Lady Draymont," he said, and his use of her title felt like a restoration of something Gavrick had systematically stripped away. "I apologize that you had to witness this. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. "I'm accustomed to witnessing unpleasant things, Your Grace." Something flickered in his expression. Understanding, perhaps. Or recognition. "I imagine you are." "Renville." Gavrick's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "The debt will be settled." The Duke turned, and his presence seemed to fill the entire space. "But not through your wife's degradation." "Then how?" "I'll take her." The words fell like stones into still water. "I beg your pardon?" Gavrick sputtered. "Your marriage," Renville continued calmly, "has not been consummated. Don't bother denying it. Your servants talk, and mine listen. An unconsummated marriage can be annulled. I have connections with the Archbishop. The process would take weeks, not months." Lysanne couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The Duke of Stormhaven was offering to dissolve her marriage, to take her from this house, from Gavrick, from the gray half-life she'd been surviving for the past year. "That's absurd," Valindra interjected. "Why would you want her? She's nothing. No beauty, no fortune, no connections worth mentioning." Renville didn't even look at her. His eyes remained fixed on Gavrick. "Your debt will be forgiven in full. You'll retain the shipping contracts. I have no interest in them. In exchange, I take your wife, and you never contact her again." She's my property, Gavrik snarled. She's a human being. Renvile's voice dropped to something dangerous, though I understand that distinction is lost on you. Gavrik's hands clenched at his sides. Lysanne could see him calculating, weighing his pride against his debts, his possession of her against his need for solvency. Why? He demanded. Why would you possibly want her? Renvile smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps I simply enjoyed taking things from men who don't deserve them. The cruelty of it shouldn't have comforted her, but it did. Because for the first time in a year, someone was fighting for her, even if his motives were unclear, even if this was merely a game between powerful men. At least she wasn't invisible anymore. Fine. Gavrik spat the word like poison. Take her. She's been nothing but a disappointment anyway. Gavrik! Valindra's voice was sharp with warning. No. He shook off her restraining hand. Let him have her. Let him discover what I discovered. That she's cold, passionless, and utterly useless as a wife. I give it 3 months before he sends her back. Renvile's expression didn't change, but his eyes went terrifyingly cold. She won't be coming back. He extended his hand to Lysanne. My lady, my carriage is waiting. Lysanne stared at his outstretched hand. Elegant fingers, a signet ring bearing the falcon crest, strength evident in every line. I don't understand, she whispered. Why are you doing this? Does it matter? Yes. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she would question, rather than simply accept. Then ask me again, he said quietly, when we're away from here. I'll tell you the truth. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even really an answer. But it was more than Gavrik had ever given her. Lysanne placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, certain. And something cracked open in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Mrs. Heswick, she called, her voice steadier than she expected. Please have my things packed. Only what belongs to me. Nothing from Lord Draymont. That will take time, my lady. She won't need anything, Renvile interrupted. Everything she requires will be provided. He led her toward the door, and Lysanne didn't look back. Not at Gavrik's furious face, not at Valindra's calculating stare, not at the servants watching with wide eyes. But as they stepped into the autumn sunlight, she heard Gavrik's voice echo behind them, sharp with malice. You'll regret this, Renvile. She's damaged goods, broken. Nothing you do will fix what's wrong with her. Renvile paused at the carriage door. When he turned, his smile was winter itself. I'm not trying to fix her, Gavrik. I'm taking her somewhere. You can never hurt her again. He handed her into the carriage, and the door closed on her old life. But as the horses began to move, carrying her away from Draymont Manor forever, Lysanne couldn't shake the feeling that she'd simply traded one cage for another, and she still didn't know why. The Duke's carriage was nothing like Gavrik's, where her husband's vehicle had been functional and austere. Dark leather, minimal cushioning, curtains that blocked out the light. This carriage was designed for comfort. Velvet seats in deep midnight blue, silver lanterns that cast a warm glow against the gathering dusk. A fur blanket draped across the seat opposite her. Lysanne sat rigidly in the corner, acutely aware of the man across from her. Renvile had removed his gloves, and she found herself staring at his hands, the way his fingers drummed absently against his knee, the signet ring catching the lantern light, the strength evident in his wrists, hands that had reached for her when no one else would. You're wondering if you've made a terrible mistake. His voice cut through the silence, and Lysanne's gaze snapped to his face. I'm wondering many things, Your Grace, such as why you intervened, what you want from me, where we're going, what happens when we arrive. She paused. Whether you're simply a different kind of monster than the one I left behind. If her bluntness surprised him, He didn't show it. Instead, the corner of his mouth quirked upward. Not quite a smile, but something close. Refreshingly direct. Gavrik didn't mention that quality. Gavrik and I rarely spoke. No, I imagine you didn't. He leaned back against the velvet seat, studying her with those unnerving gray eyes. You asked me why I intervened. The truth is complicated. I have time. Yes. His gaze flickered to the window, where the countryside rolled past in shadows of gold and amber. I suppose you do. He was silent for a long moment, and Lysanne forced herself to wait, to not fill the space with nervous chatter the way she'd learned to do with Gavris, always trying to smooth over silences before they curdled into contempt. Your father, Renville said finally, was a good man. Whatever she'd expected, it wasn't that. You knew my father? I met him. Once, when I was 19, and he was expanding his shipping routes through my territory. He needed permissions, contracts, and favorable terms. Renville's expression grew distant. I was young and arrogant, more interested in proving my authority than in conducting fair business. I made him wait. Made him grovel for things that should have been straightforward negotiations. Lysanne's throat tightened. I don't understand. He never lost his dignity, even when I was being insufferable, even when my demands became unreasonable. He simply waited, answered my posturing with patience. And when the negotiations were finally complete, he looked at me, not with anger or resentment, and said, "You'll be a good man someday, Your Grace, when you stop trying so hard to prove that you already are." The words hung in the air between them. It stayed with me, Renville continued quietly. The way he saw through my performance, the kindness he showed when he had every reason to despise me. He met her eyes. When I learned he died in debt to my estate, I was already too late. By the time the paperwork reached me, you'd been married to Gavrik for 3 months. Then why now? Why not intervene sooner? Because I didn't know. His jaw tightened. I didn't know what kind of man Gavrik Draymont truly was. My solicitors handled the debt collection. They reported that the matter was settled through marriage. Dowry transferred. Accounts balanced. It was only recently that I learned the truth. What truth? That your father's debt was deliberately exaggerated by Draymont's solicitors. That the dowry you brought should have covered everything with surplus to spare. That Gavrik used false accounting to trap your family into the marriage contract. Renville's voice hardened. That you've spent the past year being punished for a debt that never existed. The air left Lysanne's lungs. My father died, believing he'd saved me, she whispered. Believing the marriage would provide for me, protect me. He was deceived. You both were. The carriage wheels churned against gravel as the road changed from packed earth to something finer. Lysanne pressed her hands together in her lap, willing them not to shake. Where are we going? Stormhaven. My estate. He paused. You'll be safe there. I have a sister, or Ven, who will be delighted by your company. There will be lawyers, paperwork, and an annulment to secure. But you'll have time to recover, to decide what you want your future to hold. And what do you expect in return? The question came out sharper than she intended, edged with the suspicion Gavrik had taught her. No one gave without expecting something back. Renville regarded her steadily. I expect nothing. I don't believe you. No, he agreed. I wouldn't either, in your position. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, bringing himself closer to her level. Let me be plain, Lady Draymont. Lysanne! She didn't know why she corrected him, only that she couldn't bear to hear that name anymore. Please, if I'm to be free of him, I'd like to be free of that name as well. Something flickered in his expression. Lysanne, then. Her name and his voice sounded different, like a beginning rather than a curse. I have no designs on you. No hidden agenda requiring your compliance. I intervened because your father showed me kindness when I deserved none, and I've been carrying that debt for nearly a decade. Today, I had the chance to repay it. That's all. That's all? That's all. She wanted to believe him, desperately. But a year of Gavrick's cruelty had taught her that words were cheap, and promises even cheaper. I have conditions, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. Conditions? If I'm to stay at your estate, depend on your hospitality, accept your help with the annulment, I need to understand the terms. This isn't a business negotiation. Everything is a negotiation. She lifted her chin, channeling strength she wasn't sure she possessed. My father taught me that. Something changed in Renville's expression. Respect, perhaps, or curiosity. Very well. Name your conditions. Lysanne took a breath, organizing her racing thoughts into something coherent. First, I want to understand the legal process. Every document, every decision. I want to be informed and consulted. I won't be shuffled through another arrangement without my knowledge or consent. Done. My solicitor will meet with you directly. You'll see every paper before any action is taken. Second, she continued, I need to earn my place. I won't be a charity case. If there's work I can do, managing accounts, correspondence, anything, I want to contribute. You're a guest, not an employee. I'm neither, Your Grace. I'm a woman who needs to learn how to survive on her own, because I have no guarantee that anyone will always be there to save me. Her voice cracked slightly. When the annulment is complete, I need to be capable of supporting myself. Give me that chance. Renville studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. My sister manages the household correspondence, he said slowly. She's been wanting help for months. I imagined she'd be grateful for someone with a decent hand and a clear head. That's acceptable. And your third condition? Lysanne hesitated. This one was harder. This one required admitting a vulnerability she'd tried desperately to hide. I need to know, she said quietly, that when Gavrick comes for me, because he will come, whatever bargain you struck today won't hold his pride forever. I need to know that I won't be handed back. The carriage fell silent. Outside, the trees had given way to open fields, and Lysanne could see a great house rising in the distance, its windows glowing warm against the darkening sky. Look at me. The command was soft, but absolute. Lysanne raised her eyes to meet his. Gavrick Draymont will never touch you again. Renville's voice held the weight of an oath. Not while I draw breath. You have my word. Not as a duke, but as a man who understands what it means to be powerless in the hands of someone cruel. The words landed somewhere deep in her chest, cracking through walls she hadn't realized she'd built. You understand that? She whispered. His smile was bitter. We all have our monsters, Lysanne. Some of us simply learn to hide the scars better than others. The carriage began to slow. Through the window, Stormhaven revealed itself, a sprawling manor of gray stone and climbing ivy, elegant without being ostentatious, warm lights spilling from every window as if the house itself was welcoming her home. We've arrived, Renville said, and for a moment his careful mask slipped. She saw exhaustion there, and something that looked almost like hope. My sister will be insufferable with excitement. I apologize in advance. Despite everything, the terror of the day, the uncertainty of the future, the weight of all she still didn't understand, Lysanne felt her lips curve into something that might have been a smile. I think I could use some insufferable excitement. The carriage door opened, and a young woman's voice rang out, bright and eager. Renville, finally! Mrs. Fenwick said you were bringing a guest, but she wouldn't tell me anything, and I've been waiting for hours. Lysanne stepped down from the carriage into the cool evening air, and Orven Vanthor stopped mid-sentence. She was younger than Lysen expected, perhaps 17, with her brother's dark hair, but warm brown eyes, and a face that seemed incapable of hiding any emotion. "Oh," Orven breathed, staring at Lysen with undisguised wonder. "Oh, she's lovely." "Orven," Renvile warned, "and she's wearing the most dreadful dress I've ever seen, which means she needs me immediately." Orven grabbed Lysen's hands before anyone could stop her. "I'm Orven. You're clearly in need of rescue. How fortunate that rescuing people is our family specialty." Over Orven's shoulder, Lysen caught Renvoil's eye. He shook his head slightly, but the corner of his mouth was twitching. "Miss Vanthor." "Orven. We're going to be friends. I can already tell." She began pulling Lysen toward the house. "You look exhausted and possibly traumatized. I have hot chocolate and opinions about everything. Come with me." Lysen let herself be dragged, too overwhelmed to protest. But as she crossed the threshold of Stormhaven, she glanced back once to find Renvile still standing by the carriage, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Welcome home," he said quietly. And for the first time in a year, the word didn't feel like a lie. Sleep came reluctantly and left too soon. Lysen woke to pale morning light filtering through curtains she didn't recognize, in a bed softer than anything she'd ever known. For one disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed over her. The carriage, Gavrick's fury, Valindra's cruel smile, and a duke with winter-gray eyes who had looked at her like she mattered. The room was beautiful. Cream walls with delicate blue trim, a writing desk beneath windows, overlooking gardens bursting with late autumn roses, a wardrobe that could have held 50 of the gray dresses Gavrick had permitted her. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand, chrysanthemums and lavender, replacing the stale emptiness she'd grown accustomed to. Someone had laid out clothes while she slept, a morning dress of soft sage green, simpler than fashionable, but infinitely finer than anything she'd worn in a year. Beside it sat a note in rounded, enthusiastic handwriting. "This belonged to me before I grew 3 inches in one summer. It should fit you perfectly. Come find me when you're ready. I've told Cook to make her famous cinnamon pastries, and I refuse to eat them alone." Despite everything, Lysen smiled. A knock at the door made her startle. "My lady, I'm Pella. Lady Orven asked me to attend you this morning." The maid who entered was perhaps 30, with kind eyes and capable hands. She moved with quiet efficiency, helping Lysen dress without making her feel helpless, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style without commenting on its unfashionable length. "The green suits you, my lady," Pella said when she'd finished. "Brings out the warmth in your complexion." Lysen barely recognized herself in the mirror. The haunted creature who'd stood in Draymont Manor's entrance hall seemed like a different person entirely. This woman had color in her cheeks, light in her eyes, and hope in the set of her shoulders. It was terrifying how quickly hope could return, and how easily it could be crushed. "His Grace," she asked carefully. "Where might I find him this morning?" The Duke breakfasts early and retreats to his study for estate business. He rarely emerges before noon. Pella's expression remained neutral, but something in her tone suggested this was a long-standing pattern. Lady Orven, however, will be in the morning room, likely plotting ways to reorganize your entire existence. Lysen found herself almost laughing. "She seems energetic." "That's a generous word for it, my lady." The morning room was flooded with sunlight, its windows facing east toward gardens that rolled down to a distant lake. Orven sat at a table laden with more food than Lysen had seen in months. Pastries, fresh fruit, eggs in silver dishes, chocolate steaming in delicate cups. Finally, Orven leaped up, pulling out a chair. I was beginning to think you'd sleep until noon like my brother pretends to. Sit, eat, and tell me everything. Everything? Everything you're comfortable sharing. Orven's enthusiasm softened into something gentler. Renville told me the basics last night. About your husband. About why you're here. She reached across the table, squeezing Lisanne's hand. I won't pretend to understand what you've been through. But I want you to know. Whatever happened before, it doesn't define what happens next. Lisanne's throat tightened. You don't know me. Not yet. But I'm an excellent judge of character. Orven pushed a plate of pastries toward her. Eat something. You're too thin, and Mrs. Fenwick will take it as a personal insult if you don't appreciate her baking. The pastries were extraordinary, flaky, sweet, still warm from the oven. Lisanne ate 3 before she realized what she was doing, then flushed with embarrassment. Don't you dare apologize, Orven warned. Hunger is nothing to be ashamed of, neither is enjoying things. Her eyes sparkled. I suspect you haven't been permitted much enjoyment lately. No, Lisanne admitted quietly. I haven't. After breakfast, Orven insisted on a tour. Stormhaven was vast. 37 rooms, she announced proudly, though half of them were closed off because there weren't enough people to fill them. The library made Lisanne gasp. Floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with volumes, leather chairs positioned near fireplaces, ladders that rolled along brass tracks. Renville practically lives in here, Orven said, watching Lisanne's expression with satisfaction. Our father collected books obsessively. When he died, Renville inherited the collection and the obsession. When did your father pass? 4 years ago. Hunting accident. Orven's voice remained light, but shadows moved behind her eyes. Renville was 24. Became Duke overnight, responsible for everything. The estates, the tenants, me. He hasn't stopped working since. Lisanne thought of the man in the carriage, the exhaustion he'd tried to hide, the bitter smile when he'd spoken of monsters and scars. What was he like, before? Orven considered the question. Lighter, he laughed more, had friends, went to parties, and drove our mother mad with his recklessness. She ran her fingers along a shelf of poetry. Now he's careful, controlled, like he's afraid that if he stops managing everything for one moment, it will all collapse. Perhaps it will. Perhaps. Orven turned to face her. Or perhaps he just needs someone to remind him that surviving isn't the same as living. The words echoed something Lisanne had felt, but couldn't articulate. The way she'd shrunk herself at Draymont Manor, becoming smaller and quieter each day, until survival was her only ambition. You're very wise for 17, she said. I'm very bored for 17, Orven corrected. Wisdom is what happens when you have too much time to think and not enough people to talk to. She linked her arm through Lisanne's. Which is why you're a gift. Someone new to talk to. Someone with experiences beyond these walls. Someone who... She stopped abruptly. Through the library windows, Lisanne could see a carriage approaching on the long drive. Black lacquer with gold trim, pulled by 4 matching grays. What is it? She asked, watching Orven's face pale. Grandmother. The word came out like a warning. She wasn't supposed to arrive until next week. Your grandmother? The Dowager Duchess of Stormhaven, Lady Valdris Vanthor. Orven's grip tightened on Lisanne's arm. She's formidable, and she doesn't know about you yet. The front doors opened somewhere below. Lisanne heard commanding footsteps, a sharp voice demanding to see her grandson immediately, and servants scrambling to comply. What do I do? She whispered. But Orven didn't have time to answer. The library door swung open, and Lisanne found herself face to face with the most intimidating woman she'd ever seen. Lady Valdris Vanthor stood in the doorway like a general surveying conquered territory. She was smaller than Lisanne expected, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair swept into an elaborate arrangement, and eyes the same winter gray as her grandson's. But what she lacked in height, she compensated for in presence. Every inch radiated authority, from the jet beads on her black silk gown to the ebony cane she carried more as a weapon than a walking aid. "Orven," she said, her voice carrying the crisp precision of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I was told your brother had taken leave of his senses and brought home a stray. I didn't realize you'd already befriended her." "Grandmother," Orven began, "I wasn't speaking to you." Lady Valdres's gaze fixed on Lysen with unsettling intensity. "I was speaking about you. Who are you, girl? And why are you wearing my granddaughter's dress?" Lysen's instinct screamed at her to cower, to stammer, to make herself small the way she'd learned with Gavrik. But something in Lady Valdres's stare demanded better. "My name is Lysen Merriweather," she said, using her maiden name deliberately. "Your grandson removed me from an abusive marriage yesterday. I'm wearing your granddaughter's dress because I left my husband's house with nothing but the clothes on my back." Silence. Lady Valdres's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Assessment, perhaps, or surprise at Lysen's directness. "Merriweather," she repeated slowly. "Halden Merriweather's daughter?" "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Valdres moved into the room, her cane tapping against the hardwood floors. "Your father visited Stormhaven once, years ago. Renville treated him abominably. Has he told you that?" "He has." "Did he tell you why he intervened in your marriage?" "To repay a kindness my father showed him." "Is that what he said?" Lady Valdres's laugh was dry as paper. "My grandson is many things. Intelligent, dutiful, stubborn as stone. But he is not a man who acts purely from sentiment. If he brought you here, there's more to it than old debts." "Grandmother." Renville's voice came from the doorway, sharp with warning. "I didn't realize you were arriving early." "Clearly." Lady Valdres turned to face him. "I received a rather alarming letter from Lord Draymont this morning, claiming you've stolen his wife, forged documents, and made threats against his person. Imagine my surprise." Renville moved into the room with controlled grace, positioning himself between his grandmother and Lysen. The protectiveness of the gesture wasn't lost on anyone present. "Gavrik Draymont is a liar, a fraud, and a coward, who installed his mistress in his wife's home. Whatever claims he makes should be treated accordingly." "Perhaps." Lady Valdres settled into one of the leather chairs, arranging her skirts with deliberate precision. "But you've created a scandal, Renville. An annulment will take months. In the meantime, this girl's presence in your home will be fodder for every gossip in society. Let them talk. Easy to say when you're not the one they'll tear apart." Lady Valdres's gaze returned to Lysen. "Come here, child. Sit where I can see you properly." Lysen glanced at Renville. His jaw was tight, but he gave a slight nod. She sat in the chair opposite Lady Valdres, folding her hands in her lap the way her mother had taught her. Composure under pressure, grace under fire. "Now," Lady Valdres said, "tell me everything. Not the version you told my grandson. The truth." "Grandmother." "Quiet, Renville. I want to hear her speak for herself." Lysen took a breath, and for the second time in 2 days, she chose honesty over self-preservation. She told Lady Valdres about her father's illness, his desperation to secure her future before he died, about the marriage contract that had seemed like salvation, but was actually a cage, about Gavrik's coldness, his contempt, the way he made her feel like an unwanted burden rather than a wife, about Valindra arriving in crimson silk, claiming the house like she owned it. She didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, simply laid out the facts with the same clarity she'd used when managing her father's accounts in the final months of his life. When she finished, Lady Valdres was silent for a long moment. "You have spine," she said finally. I didn't expect that. I've had to develop it, Your Grace. Clearly. Lady Valdres tapped her cane against the floor. My grandson believes he's rescuing you. What do you believe? I believe, Lysanne said carefully, that I've been given an opportunity. Whether it's rescue or something else remains to be seen. And what do you intend to do with this opportunity? Survive. Learn. Find a way to support myself when the annulment is complete. She met Lady Valdres's eyes directly. I have no illusions about my position, Your Grace. I'm not a princess in a fairy tale. I'm a woman with no fortune, no family, and a ruined reputation. But I'm not broken, no matter what my husband claimed, and I refuse to be a burden on your grandson's charity forever. The silence that followed felt different, less like judgment, and more like consideration. Lady Valdres turned to Renvoil, who had been standing rigid by the fireplace throughout the entire exchange. She reminds me of your mother, she said. Whatever Lysanne expected, it wasn't that. Renvoil's expression flickered. Pain, surprise, something vulnerable beneath his controlled facade. Grandmother. Thessaly was the same way. Direct to the point of rudeness, stubborn beyond reason, utterly convinced she could forge her own path, regardless of what society expected. Lady Valdres's voice softened almost imperceptibly. I opposed your father's marriage to her. Did you know that? I'd heard rumors. More than rumors. I threatened to disown him. Lady Valdres's grip tightened on her cane. She was a baron's daughter, with no fortune and no connections, completely unsuitable for a future duke. But she had spine, and she made your father happy in a way I'd never seen before. Why are you telling me this? Renvoil asked quietly. Because I was wrong. The admission seemed to cost her something. I spent years being wrong, and then she died giving birth to Orven, and I never got the chance to tell her. Orven made a small sound. Lysanne felt tears prick her eyes, though she barely understood why. I won't make the same mistake twice, Lady Valdres continued, rising from her chair with surprising grace. This girl can stay. I'll support the annulment publicly, and I'll destroy anyone who dares to speak ill of her in my presence. Lysanne stood, unsure what to say. Your Grace, Don't thank me yet. Lady Valdres's eyes glittered. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because my grandson has been a ghost since his father died, and you're the first thing I've seen spark life in him in 4 years. She moved toward the door, then paused. Don't disappoint me, Miss Merriweather. I make a formidable ally, but an even more formidable enemy. She swept out, leaving silence in her wake. Well, Orven said weakly. That went better than expected. Renvoil hadn't moved. He stood by the fireplace, staring at the spot where his grandmother had sat, his expression unreadable. Your mother, Lysanne said softly. She sounds remarkable. She was. His voice was rough. She died when I was 8. I barely remember her face anymore, but I remember the way she laughed, the way my father looked at her like she'd hung the moon. I'm sorry. Don't be. He finally turned to face her, and something had shifted in his expression. The walls were thinner now, the man beneath more visible. She would have liked you, I think. She always preferred people with fire in them. Before Lysanne could respond, he strode from the room, leaving her alone with Orven and the weight of everything unspoken between them. The days at Stormhaven developed a rhythm. Mornings belonged to Orven. Breakfast in the sunlit morning room, walks through gardens that blazed with autumn color, conversations that ranged from fashion to philosophy, with no clear boundary between. Afternoons, Lysanne worked alongside the estate's secretary, learning the intricacies of correspondence and account management that would eventually allow her to support herself. Evenings were for reading in the library. Surrounded by books, she'd only dreamed of accessing. And Renville remained a ghost. She caught glimpses of him, crossing the entrance hall with a stack of documents, conferring with his steward near the stables, riding out at dawn to inspect distant tenant farms. But he never joined them for meals, never lingered in shared spaces, and never repeated the vulnerability he'd shown after his grandmother's visit. "He's avoiding you," Orven announced on the 6th day, with characteristic bluntness. "He's busy. He's always busy, but he's never quite this busy." Orven set down her embroidery with a frustrated sigh. "Before you arrived, he'd at least take dinner with us. Now he claims he's too occupied with the annulment paperwork." The annulment. Lysanne had been trying not to think about it. The legal dissolution of a marriage that had never truly existed. Renville's solicitor had visited twice, presenting documents she signed with hands that trembled despite her best efforts. Soon, she would be free. Truly, legally free. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it brought a creeping dread she couldn't name. "Perhaps he regrets bringing me here," she said quietly. "Impossible. You're the best thing that's happened to this house in years." Orven's voice softened. He's scared, Lysanne. Of himself. Of what he feels. I know my brother. What he feels. Orven just smiled and returned to her embroidery. That evening, Lysanne broke routine. Instead of retreating to the library after dinner, she sought out Renville's study. The door was closed, lamplight seeping from beneath it, and she hesitated, with her hand raised to knock. What was she doing? He was a duke. She was a ruined woman seeking charity in his home. Whatever connection she'd imagined between them was surely one-sided. A drowning person, mistaking her rescuer for something more. But then she remembered his grandmother's words. "You're the first thing I've seen spark life in him in 4 years." She knocked. "Enter." His study was smaller than she expected, crowded with books and papers, and the organized chaos of a man who worked too much. Renville sat behind a massive oak desk, coatless, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark hair falling across his forehead, in a way that made him look younger, more approachable. "Lysanne." Surprise flickered across his face. "Is something wrong?" "You've been avoiding me." The directness caught him off guard. He set down his pen, leaning back in his chair with an expression she couldn't read. "I've been occupied with your annulment. You've been hiding." She moved further into the room, closing the door behind her. "Your sister noticed. Your grandmother noticed. The servants certainly noticed. And you?" "I noticed that the man who rescued me has become a stranger." She stopped at the edge of his desk, close enough to see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "If my presence here has become a burden, it hasn't. Then why won't you look at me?" The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Renville rose from his chair, moving to the window that overlooked the moonlit gardens. For a long moment, he was silent. "Because when I look at you," he said finally, "I forget that this is temporary." Lysanne's breath caught. "Temporary?" "The annulment will be finalized in 3 weeks. You'll receive a settlement." "Don't argue," my grandmother insisted, and no one argues with her. "You'll have enough to establish yourself wherever you choose. A new life, free from your husband, free from scandal, free from—" He stopped, his hands gripping the windowsill. "Free from me. And if I don't want to be free from you?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Horror flooded through her. She'd overstepped, revealed too much, mistaken kindness for something deeper. But Renville turned, and his expression stole her breath. "Don't say things you don't mean," he said roughly. "I've already crossed lines I swore I wouldn't cross. I brought you into my home when you were vulnerable, showed you kindness when you had nowhere else to turn. If you're feeling gratitude, affection, anything that resembles—" "This isn't gratitude." She crossed the space between them before her courage could fail. They stood inches apart now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the pulse jumping in his throat. "This is terror," she continued, her voice unsteady. "Because you're the first person in my entire life who's made me feel seen. Not useful, or suitable, or manageable. Seen. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if it's real, or if I'm so starved for kindness that I'm inventing connection where none exists. Listen, but I know that when you're not there at breakfast, I feel your absence like a missing limb. I know that when I hear your voice in the hallway, my heart beats differently. I know that when you look at me, really look at me, I feel like I could become someone worth looking at." Her voice broke on the last word. Renvile's hand rose, trembling slightly, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, reverent, as if she were something precious he was afraid to damage. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "What you make me feel. Then tell me." "I can't." "Why?" "Because if I start, I won't be able to stop." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "Because you're still married, still healing, still finding your footing. And I refuse to be another man who takes advantage of your vulnerability. What if I want you to?" His eyes darkened. For one breathless moment, she thought he would kiss her, thought she could see the exact instant when his control cracked. Then he stepped back, putting careful distance between them. 3 weeks, he said, his voice strained. "When the annulment is finalized, when you're truly free, when you've had time to decide what you want, without the weight of obligation or gratitude. Ask me again. And if I don't change my mind." His smile was soft, pained, and full of a longing he couldn't quite hide. "Then I'll tell you everything." He returned to his desk, picking up his pen with hands that weren't quite steady. A dismissal, but a gentle one. Lysanne retreated to the door, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Renvile," he looked up. "I'm not going to change my mind." She left before he could respond, but she heard his sharp intake of breath, saw the pen slip from his fingers. 3 weeks, 21 days to prove that what she felt wasn't gratitude or desperation, or the echo of trauma seeking comfort. 21 days to make him understand that sometimes rescue was just the beginning. She just had to survive them first. The Vanthor Autumn Ball was a tradition stretching back 5 generations. Every noble family within 50 miles attends, Orven explained, adjusting the pearl clips in Lysanne's hair. It's Stormhaven's chance to remind everyone that the Vanthors still matter, still hold power, and still deserve respect. And this year, they'll be watching me. This year, they'll be watching to see if you crumble. Orven met her eyes in the mirror. Don't give them the satisfaction. 2 weeks had passed since the conversation in Renvile's study. 2 weeks of careful distance and charged glances, of conversations that lasted too long and silences that said too much. He'd kept his word, never touching her, never crossing the boundary he'd drawn. But something had shifted between them. An understanding. A promise. 1 more week until the annulment was final. The gown Orven had commissioned was nothing like Lysanne had ever worn. Deep sapphire silk that caught the candlelight, a neckline that was elegant rather than modest, sleeves that left her shoulders bare. She looked, for the first time in her life, like someone who belonged in a ballroom. "Stunning," Lady Valdris pronounced from the doorway. She wore black silk and jet, her silver hair crowned with diamonds. "The sapphires were a good choice. They bring out your coloring." "I don't have sapphires, Your Grace." "You do now." Lady Valdris opened a velvet case to reveal a necklace that made Lysanne gasp. A cascade of sapphires and diamonds that must have cost more than her father's entire shipping business. "They belonged to Renvile's mother. He asked me to give them to you tonight." Lysenne's hand trembled as she touched the stones. "I can't accept. You can, and you will. Tonight, you represent this family." Lady Valdris fastened the necklace herself, her fingers surprisingly gentle. "Whatever whispers follow you, whatever cruelty you encounter, remember, you're wearing a Vanthor legacy around your throat. Act accordingly." The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows across cream silk walls. An orchestra played from a raised platform, draped in autumn flowers. Hundreds of candles flickered like captive stars, illuminating gowns of every color and jewels that rivaled the night sky. And everyone was staring. Lysenne descended the grand staircase on Renviel's arm, acutely aware of the whispers erupting in their wake. She caught fragments. The Draymont woman, stolen wife, completely unsuitable. But she kept her chin lifted and her gaze forward. "Breathe," Renviel murmured, his hand steady on hers. "They're looking because you're beautiful. Let them look. They're looking because I'm a scandal. You're both. Own it." The evening became a gauntlet. Lady Ravencroft cornered her near the refreshment table, interrogating her about her family's reduced circumstances with barely concealed disdain. Lord Crestwell made pointed comments about women who abandoned their husbands. Mrs. Chelworth wondered aloud, just loud enough to be overheard, whether certain people understood the difference between a duke's charity and a duke's true interest. Through it all, Lysenne smiled. She answered impertinent questions with gracious deflection. She met condescension with quiet dignity. She refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her wounded, even when the cuts landed precisely where they were aimed. "You're doing magnificently," Orven whispered during a brief respite. "Half the women here want to be you, and the other half want to destroy you. That's power. It doesn't feel like power. It never does at first." The real test came during the supper dance. Renviel had claimed her for the waltz, proprietary, deliberate, a statement that set tongues wagging throughout the ballroom. They moved together with surprising grace, his hand warm at her waist, her palm pressed against his, the rest of the world fading to insignificance. "You're counting steps," he observed. "I'm counting enemies. 17. His laugh was startled, genuine. "Only 17. I thought you'd made more progress." The night is young. When the dance ended, she excused herself to find the retiring room. The corridors of Stormhaven were quieter here, away from the ballroom's crush, and she paused to catch her breath in a window alcove overlooking the moonlit gardens. That's when she heard the voices. Completely shameless, really, parading around in Thessaly's sapphires, as if she's already the Duchess. "Well, she won't be for long. I heard Lord Draymont is planning to contest the annulment. Apparently, there's evidence the marriage was consummated after all." Lysenne's blood turned to ice. "Evidence? What kind of evidence?" "Servants willing to testify. Letters proving she was, shall we say, not quite the innocent victim she's pretending to be." How delicious. The Duke will be humiliated. He deserves it, honestly. Taking up with another man's wife? Father says. Lysenne stepped into the corridor, and the two young women fell silent, their faces cycling through shock, embarrassment, and finally, defiance. Miss Merriweather. The taller one, Lord Fairweather's daughter, Lysenne recognized, recovered first. "We didn't see you there. Clearly. We were just discussing my reputation, my marriage, and whatever lies my husband has been spreading." Lysenne's voice was calm, but something dangerous burned beneath it. "Yes, I heard." The shorter girl had the grace to look ashamed, but Miss Chelworth lifted her chin, all aristocratic arrogance. "If you're going to eavesdrop, you should expect to hear unpleasant truths." "Truths?" Lysenne stepped closer. Let me share some truths with you, Miss Chelworth. My husband never touched me. Not once, in a year of marriage. He was too busy visiting his mistress, a woman he installed in our home the same day a duke arrived to witness my humiliation. Miss Chelworth's confidence wavered. Any evidence to the contrary is fabricated, Lysanne continued. Any servant willing to testify is lying for money or fear. And anyone who spreads these rumors will eventually face the consequences when the truth emerges. She smiled, and it was Lady Valdres's smile, sharp, cold, utterly without mercy. I may be a scandal, Miss Chelworth, but I'm a scandal with the Vanthor family's protection. Can you say the same? She swept past them without waiting for a response. Her hands were shaking when she returned to the ballroom, but her face was serene. She found Orven and whispered an urgent summary of what she'd overheard. Orven's expression darkened. Gavrik is planning something. We need to warn Renvael. But before they could move, a footman appeared at Lysanne's elbow. Miss Merriweather, there's a gentleman requesting your presence in the library. He says it's urgent, regarding your mother. My mother? Confusion cut through her fear. Her mother had died when she was 12. There must be some mistake. He was quite insistent, miss. Said you'd understand when you saw what he brought. Against her better judgment, against every instinct screaming warning, Lysanne followed. The library was dark when she entered, lit only by dying embers in the fireplace. She could see a figure standing by the windows, silhouetted against the moonlight. Hello? You wish to speak with me about... The figure turned, and Lysanne's world collapsed. Hello, wife, Gavrik said. Did you really think I'd let you go that easily? The library door closed with a soft click that sounded like a death knell. Gavrik looked different than she remembered. Thinner, harder, a feverish intensity burning in eyes that had always been cold. He'd lost weight since she'd left, and gained something worse, desperation. Gavrik. She forced her voice steady. You shouldn't be here. Shouldn't I? He moved away from the window, circling toward her with predatory slowness. This is a public ball. I received an invitation months ago, back when you were still playing the dutiful wife. The invitation was rescinded, and yet, here I am. His smile was a wound. You've made quite the impression tonight, Lysanne. The sapphires are a nice touch. Are you wearing his dead mother's jewels while you plot to take her place? I'm not plotting anything. No? He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could smell brandy on his breath. You haven't been warming the Duke's bed? Spreading your legs to secure your future? The vulgarity hit like a slap. You know that's not true. You know better than anyone that I've never... What I know, Gavrik interrupted, his voice rising, is that I've been humiliated, publicly cuckolded by a man who thinks his title gives him the right to steal another man's property. I'm not property. You're my wife, his composure cracked, revealing the rage beneath. You took vows, sacred vows, and you broke them the moment you climbed into his carriage. I broke nothing. You broke everything the moment you brought your mistress into our home. Valindra has nothing to do with this. Valindra has everything to do with this. Lysanne's own anger surged, overwhelming her fear. You married me for money, ignored me for a year, and paraded another woman in front of me like I was nothing. And now you claim I've wronged you? You shamed me. You shamed yourself. Gavrik's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. She gasped, twisting to escape, but his grip only tightened. You will return with me tonight, he said, his voice dropping to something lethal. You will tell everyone that this was a misunderstanding, that Stormhaven took advantage of your distress, that you are ready to honor your marriage vows. Never. Then I'll destroy you. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot and sour. I have witnesses willing to testify that you were no virgin bride. I have letters, forged but convincing, proving you've been Stormhaven's whore since before your wedding. By the time I'm finished, no annulment court in England will grant you freedom. Those are lies. Lies become truth when enough people believe them. His free hand rose to her face, gripping her chin with painful force. You were supposed to be nothing, a quiet, grateful nobody who accepted her place. Instead, you became a problem. His eyes glittered. I solve problems, Lysen. Let her go. Renvile's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. He stood in the doorway, and Lysen had never seen him look more dangerous. His formal composure had shattered, revealing something primitive beneath. A man ready to destroy anyone who threatened what was his. Gavrick's grip didn't loosen. Stormhaven, come to protect your investment? I won't ask twice. Or what? You'll call me out? Duel at dawn? Gavrick laughed, but his voice trembled. This isn't the Middle Ages. You can't simply murder a man for reclaiming his property. She's not your property. Renvile moved into the room, each step deliberate, controlled, and terrifying. She was never your property. And if you don't remove your hands from her in the next 3 seconds, I will remove them for you. Something in his tone must have penetrated Gavrick's bravado. He released Lysen's wrist, stepping back with his hands raised in mocking surrender. Keep her then. Keep your damaged goods. His smile was poison. But remember, the annulment isn't finalized yet, and courts can be influenced by the right information, presented at the right time. Threaten her again, Renvile said quietly, and I will end you. Not through courts or solicitors. I will personally ensure that you lose everything. Your estates, your reputation, your precious Valindra. Everything. You wouldn't dare. Test me. The silence stretched, electric with violence. Then Gavrick straightened his coat, smoothing his expression into something resembling dignity. This isn't over, he said. She belongs to me. Legally, morally, before God. And I will have her back. He swept past Renville and out of the library, leaving destruction in his wake. Lysen's legs gave out. Renville caught her before she hit the floor, gathering her against his chest with desperate tenderness. She was shaking, great, racking tremors that she couldn't control, and he simply held her, one hand stroking her hair, his lips pressed against her temple. I'm sorry, he murmured. I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have... How did you know? Or Ven. She came to find me the moment you left the ballroom. His arms tightened. When I think of what might have happened if she hadn't. But she did. Lysen pulled back, meeting his eyes. She did. And you came. And I'm safe. Are you? His expression was tormented. He's not going to stop, Lysen. You heard him. He'll lie, fabricate evidence, and do whatever it takes to keep you trapped. Then we fight back. How? His connections, his money. We have connections too. We have your grandmother. We have the truth. She gripped his lapels, forcing him to focus on her. I spent a year being afraid, Renville. A year making myself small, hoping that if I was quiet enough, invisible enough, the monster would stop noticing me. But it doesn't work. It never works. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done hiding. Her voice strengthened with each word. If Gavrick wants a war, I'll give him one. I'll stand in front of every court in England and tell them exactly what kind of man he is. Renville kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and consuming. A year of loneliness and weeks of restraint shattering into something raw and real. His hands framed her face like she was precious. His mouth moved against hers like she was air, and Lysen kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both gasping. His forehead rested against hers. "I know I said I'd wait," he breathed. "I know I promised. Don't apologize." She pulled him back, kissing him again, softer this time. "Don't ever apologize for this." They held each other in the darkened library, while the ball continued without them. While somewhere beyond these walls, Gavric Draymont plotted their destruction. But in this moment, none of that mattered. In this moment, they had each other. And for the first time, Lysen believed that might be enough. 3 days after the ball, the letters began arriving. The first came to Lady Valdres, a detailed account of Lysen's true character, complete with fabricated testimony from servants who claimed to have witnessed her infidelity. The second went to Renville's solicitor, threatening legal action if the annulment proceeded. The third arrived at the offices of London's most scandalous gossip sheet. By week's end, Lysen's name was poison. "They're calling you a fortune hunter," Orven reported grimly, setting down a stack of newspapers she'd tried to hide. "A seductress who abandoned her lawful husband to prey on a grieving duke. Let me see. Lysen, let me see." The articles were worse than she'd imagined. Lurid speculation about her relationship with Renvoil. Anonymous sources detailing her supposed affairs. A particularly vicious editorial questioning whether women of her moral character deserved legal protection at all. "It's all lies," Orven said fiercely. "Everyone who matters knows it." "Everyone who matters isn't the court." Lysen set the papers down with numb fingers. "If Gavric convinces a judge that the marriage was consummated, the annulment fails. And if the annulment fails..." She couldn't finish the sentence. Renville found her in the library that evening, staring at the fire with empty eyes. "The solicitor believes we can still prevail," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "We have witnesses of our own. Mrs. Heswick from Draymont Manor has agreed to testify about Valindra's presence, about Gavric's neglect. And my grandmother's influence isn't insignificant. And if it's not enough, then we appeal. We fight. We don't stop until what?" Lysen turned to face him, and the despair in her expression made his breath catch. "Until my reputation is destroyed beyond repair, until your family name is dragged through every scandal sheet in England, until you lose everything you've worked to protect. You're worth protecting, am I?" Her laugh was bitter. "I'm nobody, Renville, a merchant's daughter with a ruined marriage and enemies who will stop at nothing to see me destroyed. You could have any woman in England, titled, wealthy, and respectable. Instead, you've tied yourself to a scandal that may never end. I don't want any woman in England. Then you're a fool. Perhaps." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. "But I'd rather be a fool with you than be sensible without you. That's not fair. None of this is fair." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Life isn't fair. Your father taught me that in his own way. Fair is a luxury for people who've never had to fight for anything." Lysen's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to destroy you." "You couldn't if you tried." She wanted to believe him, desperately. But the weight of the past week pressed down on her chest like stones, making it hard to breathe, harder to hope. "Lady Ravencroft withdrew her daughter's friendship with Orven," she whispered. "Did you know? Because of me, your sister is being punished. Orven doesn't care about Lady Ravencroft's insipid daughter. She shouldn't have to care. She shouldn't have to pay for my presence in your lives. Lysen, your grandmother received 3 letters today. 3. All demanding she disavow me publicly or face social consequences." The tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. "I'm poisoned, Renville. Everything I touch, everyone who helps me, they suffer for it." He pulled her into his arms, holding her while she wept against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her cheek, steady and strong, an anchor in the storm. "Listen to me," he said, his voice rough. "Listen carefully. I spent 4 years being safe, controlled, making decisions based on what was prudent, what was expected, what would protect the family legacy. And you know what it got me? Emptiness. A house full of beautiful things, and not a single moment of genuine happiness. Renvile. Then you appeared. Literally fell into my life because of a debt I'd forgotten I owed. And suddenly, everything that seemed so important, society's approval, strategic alliances, careful reputation management, it all became meaningless." He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're not poison. You're the only real thing I've had in years. And I will not let Gavric Draymont or anyone else take that from me. But the cost is mine to pay." He kissed her forehead, her tear-stained cheeks, and the corner of her mouth. "Let me pay it." For a moment, she almost believed. Then the door burst open, and a footman stood in the entrance, pale and breathless. "Your Grace, there's been a development. Lord Draymont is here, with constables." Lysenne's blood turned to ice. They found Gavric in the entrance hall, flanked by 2 uniformed men, and wearing an expression of triumphant satisfaction. "What is the meaning of this?" Lady Valdres demanded, descending the stairs with regal fury. "Lady Valdres!" Gavric's boo was a mockery. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm here on official business." He held up a folded document. A warrant for the arrest of Lysenne Draymont on charges of abandonment, theft, and adultery. The world tilted. "Those charges are absurd," Renvile snarled. "Fabricated." The court disagrees. Gavric's smile was a knife. "Testimony has been provided. Evidence submitted. A judge has issued the warrant, and these constables are here to execute it. You can't take her." "I'm afraid the law says otherwise." Gavric nodded to the constables. "Gentlemen, if you please." They moved toward Lysenne, and she felt herself shrinking, becoming the frightened girl she'd been at Draymont Manor. Small, helpless, trapped. "Wait." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "If I go with you willingly, no scene, no resistance. Will you leave Stormhaven in peace?" "Lysenne, no. Will you?" She met Gavric's eyes directly. He considered her for a long moment. "The Van Thors will face no further action from me. You have my word." "Your word means nothing," Renvile spat. "Perhaps. But it's all she has." Gavric extended his hand. "Come along, wife. It's time to go home." Lysenne looked at Renvile, at his anguished face, his clenched fists, the desperate love in his eyes that she'd only just begun to understand. "Don't do this," he whispered. "Please. We'll find another way." "There is no other way." She touched his cheek, memorizing the feel of him. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me." Then she turned and walked toward Gavric, placing her hand in his. The last thing she saw before the door closed was Renvile's face, destroyed. The carriage ride to Draymont Manor felt like a descent into hell. Gavric sat across from her, his expression shifting between triumph and barely contained fury. The constables had departed once she was secured in the carriage, their job done, their palms presumably greased, leaving her alone with the man who had made her life a prison. "You thought you could escape me?" he said, almost conversationally. "You actually believed that a few weeks with a lovesick duke could undo a legal marriage." Lysenne didn't respond. There was nothing to say. "The charges won't hold, of course. No real evidence, no credible witnesses. But by the time the courts sort it out, you'll be back where you belong." His smile was cold. "And Stormhaven will have moved on, found someone else to rescue, forgotten all about the merchant's daughter he briefly found amusing. He won't forget." "No." Gavric leaned forward. "Tell me, wife, When the scandal sheets are done destroying your reputation, when every door in society is closed to you, when you're nothing but a cautionary tale mothers tell their daughters, do you really believe he'll still want you? The words landed where they were meant to, finding the cracks in her armor. He's a duke, Gavrik continued. He has responsibilities, obligations, a family legacy to protect. You were a distraction, an interesting puzzle to solve. But distractions end, and men like Stormhaven always choose duty in the end. You don't know him. I know his type. Honorable, dutiful, willing to sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good. Gavrik's laugh was cruel. That's the delicious irony, isn't it? The very qualities that made him rescue you are the same ones that will make him abandon you. Draymont Manor loomed in the darkness, its windows unlit, and its facade unwelcoming. Lysanne felt the weight of the place pressing down on her. All those months of silence and neglect, of being treated like an inconvenience rather than a person. Valindra was waiting in the entrance hall. She wore crimson again, as if the color were her signature, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of mock sympathy. Poor thing, she cooed, as Gavrik guided Lysanne inside. You look exhausted. Shall I have a bath drawn? Something to eat? Leave her alone, Gavrik said shortly. She's going to her room. The same room. Nothing has changed. Of course, darling. Lysanne climbed the stairs on legs that felt like lead. Behind her, she could hear Gavrik and Valindra murmuring together, their voices intimate, exclusive, a partnership she'd never been part of. Her old room was exactly as she'd left it. Bare walls, simple furniture, curtains that blocked out the light. The gray dress she'd worn to the opera that day still hung in the wardrobe, a ghost of the woman she'd been. She sat on the edge of the bed and waited for morning. But morning brought no relief. Only more of Gavrik's presence, his constant reminders of her position, and his detailed descriptions of what her future would hold once the courts confirmed her status as his property. No more Duke, he said at breakfast, while Valindra buttered toast beside him. No more balls or beautiful gowns. You'll manage the household accounts, receive an allowance for basic necessities, and make yourself invisible. That's all I require from you now. Invisibility. And if I refuse, then I'll have you committed. His eyes were flat. Mental instability, nervous disorder, whatever diagnosis my physician friend recommends. You'll spend the rest of your life in a private facility, and no one will ask questions. The threat was real. She could see it in his face. Days blurred together. Lysanne moved through the house like a ghost, eating what was placed before her, sleeping when exhaustion demanded it, feeling herself shrinking with each passing hour. Renvael would come, she told herself. He'd find a way. But as the first week became the second, hope began to curdle into something darker. Perhaps Gavrik was right. Perhaps Renvael was already moving on, accepting the inevitable, choosing duty over sentiment. Perhaps the kiss in the library, the promises in his study, the way he'd looked at her like she was everything. Perhaps it had all been temporary after all. On the 12th night, she stood at her window, staring at the stars. She thought about her mother, who died believing the world could be kind. Her father, who'd sold her to save her and failed. All the dreams she'd had as a girl, of love, of happiness, of a life that meant something. She'd touched that life. Briefly. With Renvael and Orvin, and even fierce Lady Valdris. And now, it was gone. A soft knock at her door made her turn. Mrs. Heswick stood in the hallway, the housekeeper's face illuminated by a single candle. Her expression was complicated. Guilt and determination warring for dominance. "My lady," she whispered. "There's someone at the servants' entrance. Someone asking for you." "Who?" "A young woman. She says her name is Orven, and she says to tell you." Mrs. Heswick paused, checking the hallway behind her. She says to tell you that her brother is coming. Tonight. And you need to be ready. Hope, treacherous and impossible, flickered back to life. The servant's entrance was hidden in shadow when Lysanne slipped through it, her heart pounding against her ribs. Orven grabbed her immediately, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Thank God, she breathed. We've been planning for days. Renville wanted to storm the manor the moment you left, but grandmother convinced him to be strategic. Strategic? The charges against you have been dismissed. Orven pulled back, gripping Lysanne's shoulders. All of them. Renville's solicitor found the servants Gavric bribed and convinced them to recant. One of them actually felt guilty. She said you were always kind to her, even when you had no reason to be. Tears pricked Lysanne's eyes. The annulment? Finalized yesterday. The proceedings continued while you were held. Renville's solicitors argued that Gavric's false arrest actually proved the marriage was irreparably broken. The judge expedited everything. You're free, Lysanne. Legally, completely free. The words didn't feel real. After everything, the threats, the fabricated evidence, the crushing weight of Gavric's power, it seemed impossible that something as simple as legal documents could make a difference. Where is Renville? Orven's expression shifted. Inside, with Gavric. What? He insisted on confronting him, personally. Orven's smile was grim. Don't worry, he brought reinforcements. They entered through a side door that Mrs. Heswick had left unlocked. The corridors were dark, the household asleep, but light spilled from beneath the library door, and voices carried through the heavy wood. Illegal detention of a free woman. Renville's voice, cold as winter. Coercion. Witness tampering. The list of charges my solicitor is preparing would destroy whatever's left of your reputation. You have no authority here. Gavric's response was defiant, but there was fear beneath it. I have every authority. Miss Merriweather, she's Miss Merriweather now, by the way, as of yesterday, was held against her will in this house. That's a criminal matter, and I have 3 magistrates in the entrance hall who are very interested in the details. Lysanne pushed open the door. The library was as she remembered it. Dark wood, heavy curtains, the oppressive weight of Gavric's taste. But now it contained something new. Renville, standing with his back to the fire, radiating controlled fury. And Gavric, for the first time since she'd known him, looking genuinely afraid. Lysanne. Renville's voice softened when he saw her. You should wait outside. No. She moved to stand beside him, shoulders squared. This is my fight, too. Gavric's face twisted with contempt. Still playing the brave heroine? How touching. Do you think hiding behind your duke will protect you forever? I'm not hiding. Lysanne met his eyes directly. I spent a year shrinking into shadows, hoping silence would protect me. It didn't work. It never works. So now I'm trying something different. And what's that? Standing up. Standing up? His laugh was bitter. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. A transaction that went wrong. A disappointing investment. Stop. The command came from the doorway. Lady Valdres entered with the inevitability of a storm, her ebony cane striking the floor with each step. Behind her came Valindra, escorted by 2 stern-faced men in legal attire, her crimson gown incongruous against her terrified expression. Lady Valindra has been most helpful, Lady Valdres announced. Once she understood the alternative to cooperation was prosecution as an accessory to fraud, she became remarkably forthcoming. Valindra, Gavric started. Don't. Valindra's voice shook. Don't speak to me. You promised me marriage. You promised me everything. And now, she looked at Lady Valdres. Now, I've given them everything. Every document, every conversation, and every scheme you ever whispered to me. The color drained from Gavric's face. You can't do this. It's done. Renvile's voice held no mercy. Your debts are being called in. Every creditor you've borrowed from is receiving notice that the Vanthor estate is withdrawing its discretionary tolerance. Your fraudulent manipulation of Miss Merriweather's dowry has been documented and submitted to the Banking Commission. And the letters you forged to implicate her are being analyzed by handwriting experts who will testify to their origin. You're destroying me. No. Lysanne stepped forward, and something in her expression made Gavrik flinch. You destroyed yourself. You destroyed yourself when you decided that cruelty was easier than decency, when you chose Valindra over honor, when you looked at me, a frightened girl who wanted nothing more than to be a good wife, and saw only a problem to be managed. I never asked for you. No, you asked for my father's money. Her voice was steady now, strong. You got it, and you still treated me like I was worthless. That's not my failure, Gavrik. That's yours. She turned to Renvoil, and the look that passed between them needed no words. We're leaving, she said. All of us. And you. She looked back at Gavrik one last time. You can spend the rest of your life contemplating what your cruelty has cost you. They left him standing in his empty library, surrounded by the wreckage of his schemes. The carriage ride back to Stormhaven was quiet, but different. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the peaceful stillness of exhaustion finally released. Orven fell asleep against her grandmother's shoulder. Lady Valdris maintained her imperious posture, but her hand rested gently on her granddaughter's hair. And Renviel held Lysanne's hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm, his eyes never leaving her face. You were magnificent, he said softly. I was terrified. Both can be true. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. I should have come sooner. I should have... You came. She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. That's what matters. Lysanne. He waited until she looked up. I need to ask you something. Properly. Without threats or legal complications, or uncertainty about your freedom. Her heart stopped. What? Will you stay? His voice was raw with vulnerability. Not as a guest or a charity case, or a woman escaping a nightmare. Stay as something more. Stay as... Yes. I haven't finished asking. I don't need you to. She pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the hope and fear and desperate love she'd been holding back. Yes. To whatever you're asking. Yes. Outside the carriage windows, the sun was beginning to rise. 6 months later, the Stormhaven Spring Ball was declared the event of the season. Lysanne stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of ivory silk, her hand resting on Renviel's arm, watching the ballroom below fill with guests who had once whispered about her scandal and now scrambled for invitations. Ready? Renviel murmured. No, she smiled. But I'm doing it anyway. They descended together, and this time, there were no whispers. Only applause. The months since her liberation had been filled with healing and discovery. She'd learned that Renviel laughed like a boy when Orven told terrible jokes, that Lady Valdris loved Gothic novels, that Stormhaven's gardens were spectacular in spring. She'd learned that she was capable of happiness, that love wasn't a trap, that some cages could be broken open, and what emerged could be stronger than what was imprisoned. The wedding had been small, intimate, and scandalously quick by society's standards, but Lady Valdris had silenced critics with a single raised eyebrow, and eventually, even the most persistent gossips had moved on to fresher scandals. Your Grace. Lord Ravencroft approached with his wife, both wearing expressions of determined friendliness. What a magnificent evening. Lord Ravencroft. Lysanne accepted his bow with serene grace. Lady Ravencroft, how kind of you to attend. The Ravencrofts, who had withdrawn their daughter's friendship with Orven. The Ravencrofts who had publicly questioned whether Lysanne deserved her title. They were here now, smiling and flattering, because power had shifted, and they knew it. "Your daughter must join us for tea," Lysanne continued sweetly. "Orven has missed her company terribly." Lady Ravencroft's smile flickered. "Of course, Your Grace. We'd be honored." They escaped as quickly as dignity allowed. "You enjoyed that," Renville observed. "I enjoyed it very much." He pulled her onto the dance floor as the orchestra began a waltz. They moved together with the ease of a couple who had learned each other's rhythms, who had weathered storms and emerged stronger. "I have something for you," he said. "A gift. Renville, you've given me everything. The wedding, the sapphires, an entirely new wardrobe. This is different." He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded letter, yellowed with age. "I found it last week, going through my father's old papers. I think you should read it." They paused near one of the tall windows, and Lysanne unfolded the letter with careful fingers. "My dear Duke," the letter began, in handwriting she recognized with a shock. Her father's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means the debt I owe you has finally come due. I hope you'll accept this letter as partial payment. Not of money, but of truth. I have a daughter. Lysanne. She is 17 as I write this, and already she shows signs of becoming the woman her mother never got to see. Kind, brave, and stubborn in the best way. She deserves a life full of beauty and love. But I'm dying. The doctors give me months, and I've made a terrible mistake. Trusted the wrong man, signed the wrong contracts. When I'm gone, my daughter will be vulnerable. My son lacks the judgment to protect her. I ask nothing of you. I have no right to ask anything. But if fate ever brings my daughter across your path, if you ever have the opportunity to show her kindness, remember that her father once saw goodness in you. Before you were a duke, when you were just a young man trying to prove yourself, I saw who you could become. I hope I was right. Your servant, Halden Merriweather." Tears streamed down Lysanne's face. "He knew," she whispered. "Somehow, he knew." "He hoped." Renville's voice was rough with emotion. "He hoped, and he trusted, and against all odds, fate listened. I miss him. I know." He pulled her close, heedless of the watching crowd. "But he'd be proud of you. The woman you've become. The life you're building." Lysanne pressed her face against his chest, letting his heartbeat steady her. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I tell you enough. You tell me every day, in every look, every touch, every moment you choose to stay." He tilted her face up, wiping her tears with gentle thumbs. "I was drowning before you, Lysanne. I'd convinced myself that duty was enough, that surviving was the same as living. You taught me otherwise. We taught each other." The orchestra shifted into something slower, softer. Around them, other couples swayed. But Lysanne was aware only of Renville, his arms around her, his heartbeat against her palm, the future stretching out before them like an unwritten story. "Dance with me," he murmured. "We're already dancing. I mean forever." His smile was everything she'd never dared to hope for. Dance with me forever. And she did. Years later, their daughter would ask how they met. At a ball, young Catrienne would guess, bouncing on her father's knee with her grandmother, Thessaly's dark curls, and her mother's stubborn chin. "Not quite," Renville would say, smoothing her hair. "Then where?" Lysanne would catch her husband's eye across the library, their library now, filled with new books alongside the old ones, with toys scattered among the philosophy texts, with life in every corner. "Your father paid a debt," she would say, smiling, "and I fell in love with the payment. It never made sense to Catrienne, but someday, When she was older, she would find a yellowed letter in her grandfather's handwriting, and she would understand. Some stories begin with chance. The best ones are built on choice, and theirs was both.